Good afternoon and welcome. It's an honor and a privilege for me today to introduce one of the world's greatest contemporary artists and Seattle native son, Dale Chihuly. Dale has popularized and revolutionized the studio glass movement, bringing this new American art to international fame. His work is included in more than 200 major museum collections, which has to be pretty close to setting the record for number of installations for a living artist. And he's exhibited in numerous prestigious museums and galleries all over the world, such as the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and other exhibitions, including the Chihuly and the Light of Jerusalem, which broke a record for 1 million visitors. He's also well known for his garden installations. He studied here at University of Washington, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and Rhode Island School of Design. And he's been the recipient of many awards, including 11 honorary doctorates and 2 fellowships for the National Endowment of the Arts. Dale and his team, working in a boathouse by the water here in Seattle, continue to push the limits of glass-blowing craftsmanship and glass art. And I have to say, about 7 years ago, I was lucky enough to get to visit the boathouse here in Seattle. And I was there with my mother, and as we left, I think we drove about 5 blocks without saying anything. And then my mother stopped and said, "That is the closest experience anyone will ever have to being at Giverny with Monet when he was painting the water lilies." She said it was just amazing to be with an artist of that caliber and quality and inspiration while he's doing some of the best work of his career. And the most amazing part of all of this is that Dale is opening his own garden here in Seattle next month. And he's going to give us an overview of that exhibit. It's Chihuly Garden and Glass. And after that, we'll also be joined by his wife, Leslie Chihuly, and Michelle Bufano for some questions. And with that, Dale Chihuly.
Thank you. Leslie and I are happy to be here, and we're going to give you a little sneak preview of Chihuly Garden and Glass. I'm going to start with a 7-minute video that'll give you kind of a history of my work. So if we could cue that up. I've often been asked, what would I like to do that I haven't done? And the first thing that comes to mind is that I'd like to build a conservatory or a glass house and to design everything that goes inside it.
I think ideas come a great deal from being alone. You know, even though I work with a big team of people all day long, I happen to be an early riser, so I'm often up at 4 or 5 in the morning and have several hours, you know, to be on my own and think about things.
There's just all sorts of possibilities with glass. I can't think of too many materials that haven't been exploited, except for glass.
One night I melted some stained glass because I had this little kiln because I was fusing the glass together. I put in a piece of iron pipe that I probably bought at the hardware store and blew a bubble. I had never seen glass blowing before, but there was a picture on the wall. I remember the picture clearly of a glass blower with his cheeks all puffed out like he's blowing a trumpet. So from that point on, I wanted to be a glass blower. In 1971, myself and some friends started the Pilchuck Glass School. The Pilchuck Glass School really is what established Seattle as the preeminent glass center of the world. Not just Seattle, this is spread out into much of the Northwest. And every summer we went back to Pilchuck, which was an experimental glass workshop. It was kind of a school, but more than, I would say more than anything, it was a place where we developed ideas and experimented back when we didn't really care about sales or anything like that. And so nothing held us back from doing a lot of experimentation.
The whole idea of making art, as far as I'm concerned, just comes from just doing it over and over and over. You just have to be making a lot of mistakes. And finally, you've just done so many thousands of pieces that it becomes sort of natural. But you got to go through 5 or 10 years of making mistakes all the time before you can develop that.
Don't worry about the form quite so much. Worry about the speed and worry about the ease of the operation. Once you get all of that going, then the form comes.
We got it down now. Let's get it down. Once we get it down, let's keep it there and roll it.
Nice.
Over and over and over and over.
One same way the
And then
whole
those
time.
forms will get better and better and better.
I've been working with glass now for 40 years. And of course the work started small and it got larger and larger. And then at a certain point, the pieces were just big enough, you know, they became hard to handle if they were any bigger. And around that same time, I started doing architectural installations. I have a degree in interior design and architecture. And so I was very comfortable working in spaces. Even my smaller objects, you know, often kind of, I think of them as architectural because they'll have one part inside another. It was a very smooth transition to, you know, the installation started small, and then as we learned how to put things together, we quit making the parts big, and then we went back to making the parts small. So it's massing all that color together. When you look at the sun, and there's 1,000 or more parts in it, and there's that much yellow, and the sun is coming through it. You know, our artificial light is going through it. It just, you know, it's just a massive amount of yellow color, and it's this big, simple form. It just has a lot of power when you see it in that way. So it was a natural thing for me to you know, to go from the smaller works to the larger works. You know, I couldn't do 1/10 of what I'm doing if I didn't have a big team. So the complexity of the big shows takes a great team of people, and I've been very fortunate to, over the years, build that team. You know, maybe I got a little bit of that organizational ability from my dad, the butcher that was a union organizer, I don't know what, but I got very fortunate in being able to work with great people. I woke up one morning and said that I wanted to hang chandeliers over the canals of Venice. And then from that came the concept of working in different countries, making the chandeliers and taking them to Venice. The first country was Finland, the second was Ireland, the third was Mexico. It gave me an opportunity to build the chandeliers or make installations, and then right outside there were woods or rivers to work in. I'd always worked outside to some degree, but since 1995, that's become a more important part of my work.
Free.
You take that idea, you make the decision to go with it, and go down that road, and you see what happens. And you know, sometimes it doesn't work. Most of the time, I've been fortunate that a lot of the projects have worked, or ideas have worked.
My family and I have been admirers of Dale and his work for many years, and his art has been symbolizing to visitors the creativity and the inspiration that lives and breathes in our city. Dale has designed something truly beautiful and inspiring for our community and the world, and personally, I can't wait to see the finished product.
So, thanks again for coming. See you here next spring. I guess it's springtime. We're going to open in 29 days, I think it is. May 21st. Right next to the Space Needle, it's about 100 feet over here. And it's going to be, this long building is called the Exhibition Hall. And that'll have 9 rooms inside the hall. This is the glass house. This is the garden. I'll go through a couple of the rooms with you. This is an installation I did in 1971 for a museum in Switzerland. And it's one of the first large-scale exhibitions. That's about 30 feet across. And I've always loved this piece, so I decided to do it over for the project. The next slide is a Northwest Indian room, which is a takeoff from a room that I have in my studio in the boathouse in Seattle, showing Pendleton blankets, Northwest Coast Indian baskets, Edward Curtis prints on the wall that you can't see, and some of my glass work that's influenced by the Indian baskets. The glass house, by the way, we started this project last August, so it's just going to take 9 months from start to finish on the project. And the glass house is just about finished. You can see part of the piece that's going to be inside there. The piece will be 100 feet long and 25 feet high inside the glass house. And then you come out of the glass house, we went by the Temple of the Sun. Over here is an installation of blue pieces. Now we're going to go to the Collection Cafe, where there's 28 different collections shown in the cafe. There'll be 23 tables, each table having a sheet of glass on top, and you look down through it into a collection. Now I'm going to bring up my lovely wife, Leslie, to talk to you about the partnering we're doing with other institutions around the project.
All right. Got reverb? Is it all okay? I hear a little something there. I'll settle down. Just want to thank Google for inviting us here today, and I want to thank you for the extraordinary work that you're doing in featuring and championing artists and creative thinkers by having talks like this. I know Dale did one before, and we're just very honored to be invited back. So thank you all for having us on the campus today. I'm Leslie Chihuly. I'm president of Chihuly Studio and Portland Press. I'm also the board chair of the Seattle Symphony Orchestra. And like many of you, Dale and I are very proud of the city we live in. We want to make a difference, and we think that this is really one of the great cities on the planet. It's a very special place in that it's big enough to have a rich and diverse cultural scene, and small enough where people feel they can make a difference. We're starters and builders. Many of us in Seattle are newcomers drawn by spectacular nature and beauty, and kept here by work, careers, families, and the opportunity to participate in meaningful ways in the life of the city. With vision, talent, capital, combined with philanthropy and volunteerism, we have created a community that attracts some of the best and the brightest in the arts and technology, medicine, business, and entrepreneurism. We're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the World's Fair, where the builders and thinkers of that time pointed to a bright future full of possibility, innovation, exploration, and achievement. In the last 50 years, Seattle has built the cultural organizations we enjoy today. Imagine Seattle and Tacoma without McCaw Hall, Benaroya Hall, the restored Paramount, the expanded Seattle Art Museum and the Sculpture Park, the Tacoma Art Museum, the Museum of Glass, the Northwest African American Museum, the Intiman, the Rep, the ACT, so many other museums, theaters, galleries, and diverse organizations of all sizes doing film, dance, music, and theater. But another important anniversary is happening right now, which you may not know of, which is called the 50th anniversary of the studio glass movement in this country. A 2,000-year-old technology was about to be turned upside down and inside out by a small group of artists who began to experiment with the natural qualities of hot glass. They began to push the material beyond anything that had ever been seen or done historically. Testing and failing, being willing to try over and over again to achieve new scale, to use old techniques in new ways, gave birth to a new movement and a new period in art history. We also celebrated the 40th anniversary of the Pilchuck Glass School this past year. It was co-founded by Dale, and the school was built out of the dreams of a few artists combined with the generosity of philanthropist Annie and John Halberg, who decided to contribute lands and funds to some young people who had ideas, energy, and passion to create. We're so proud that that school is going to be one of the founding partners of Chihuly Garden and Glass. What you will see when you visit Chihuly Garden and Glass is the work of a lifetime by a Northwest artist. It encompasses the education, the mentoring, the influences, inspiration, travels, and experience of a lifetime spent looking at the world through an artist's sensibility. When the Wright family, owners of the Space Needle, invited Dale as an artist to look at the old Fun Forest site, they invited me and our organization, Chihuly Studio, to participate in a process. We needed to make a case to the community about how private use of public land would be a benefit to the community as a whole. Person by person, group by group, at City Hall, in private and public gathering places, we began to speak to the importance of this project for kids, for fellow artists, for tourists, for families, for the city, and for the Seattle Center as a place where everyone could come and see what is possible when you have a commitment to making the world a more beautiful and aesthetic place. It says something about our city that we can recognize how one person's success as an artist means that others can have that same opportunity to imagine new worlds and to see them take shape in a lifetime. We need to continuously support our arts. We hope this project will provide more visibility and success, not only to our founding nonprofit partners, which include Pratt Fine Arts Center, Pilchuck Glass School, Arts Fund, and the Seattle Public Schools, but to all of the arts organizations in the community who exist to serve the educational, civic, and cultural needs of our city. We hope that it is a window into the very creative life of our city, and that it is a gathering place where more discussion and more advocacy for what we value can happen. Most of our arts organizations don't have the endowments of older institutions around the rest of the country, so our next push will be to endow the cultural institutions we value so that we can sustain them for the next generations. Dale and I believe that exposure to the arts should be a part of everyone's educational experience, which is why we're excited about Chihuly Garden and Glass and the partnership that it will have with the Seattle Public Schools. A science curriculum is being developed for all 8th graders in the Seattle area. We believe that the understanding of creativity within oneself and seeing it in others helps to build community and translates into more fulfilling and productive lives. So we need to continue to make the case for arts in our community. We don't take it for granted, and we remember that it is our arts that give the city its pulse. With the help and thinking of the many creative, innovative, and entrepreneurial members of our community, many of whom are in this room today and in the virtual room we're experiencing, I imagine that we can be the leaders for the rest of the world in terms of how to use our existing public and private resources wisely and to leverage those resources to a sustainable future. We hope Chihuly Garden and Glass will be a source of joy and inspiration for everyone in our city, and that people who come to visit from other cities and other countries around the world will see that Seattle is a place that supports its artists, its businesses, and can dream big dreams and make them happen. We invite everyone to go out and participate in all kinds of arts experiences in the community, music, screenings of theater, film, dance, and poetry. And we see that the beauty of creativity is that it enjoys many languages, and the more people are exposed, the more they can make connections and lead creative lives in all fields of endeavor. So thank you so much for having us. I want to also introduce you today to Michelle Bufano, who's the Executive Director of Chihuly Garden and Glass, and she'll join us for the Q&A. you.
Well, I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedule, and I know just how busy it must be with just 23 to 29 days left here in the home stretch. But to kick off, I wanted to talk a little bit about the new project, Chihuly Garden and Glass, and it came up a bit in the video, but I'd love to hear more about the inspiration behind it and also some of the challenges in Michelle's day-to-day role. So Dale, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what inspired you around the project.
Well, what inspired me was to put together what I thought of as the most important projects in my career. So it starts with 1971 and goes forward and has one room of chandeliers from Venice. And I just tried to make it as beautiful as I could.
And Michelle, you as the executive director of Chihuly Garden and Glass have been with this project every step of the way. So tell us a little bit about your day-to-day role and some of what you were looking forward to once the exhibit opens.
Well, the main part of what I've been doing is really focusing on how each visitor will experience the exhibition. So from the second they get on our website, which is up and running, to buying their tickets, coming in the door, and how they experience and interact with the art in all the different levels, parts of the exhibition. So it's been really exciting to watch the art being installed and watch how it changes every day and being able to react to that.
And I think one of the really interesting things about the exhibition is that it brings together all these different pieces of your career, as well as an urban landscape, as well as sustainable planning. And I know that one of the things that's really important to you is how your work is juxtaposed against nature. Has it been different working in an urban space? There's obviously some elements of nature there, but I'm wondering what some of the interesting challenges and opportunities have been.
It's been very different. It was pavement 6 months ago, and Richard, our landscape designer, tried to work with me with the installations that would be there and then the landscaping that would go with it. But I'm not used to working with landscape architects, so it was a challenge. As you can see today, some of the areas look pretty good, but it's not going to look as good as it could for another year or so.
Well, I think that's one of the great things about gardens is over time they grow and they change. And so, but I was lucky enough to visit the site this morning and get to see its progress, and it's already just spectacularly beautiful. And so it'll be really exciting to see how it comes out. One of the other interesting pieces that's different than other exhibits you've done is the length of this exhibit. You have the space for 30 years, and I'm wondering if that's changed at all your thoughts on how to lay it out and how to design the exhibit, because rather than just being there for one season, it's there for a lot longer.
Yeah, it really changed everything. We're used to having a show up for a month or maybe 3 or 4 months, and but when it's going to be up for 30 years, you really have to make sure that it works. And so we made a lot of the glass especially for that, like the piece that's up on the screen now. We've done other works that have made out of these what I call Persian parts, but all of these are like twice as thick as they would normally be, just to make sure that there's no way that anything could crack.
And it's right there. You can see it in the picture in the back of this image for those of you who can see the screen. It's right there at the Space Needle, which is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. Were there parts of the exhibit that were inspired by the Space Needle itself?
Probably.
I noticed there were a lot of towers.
I love that. There are these iconic towers in restaurants all over the world, and except for maybe the Eiffel Tower, this is the tower that's most known. I'm not quite sure why, but everybody loves the Space Needle. There was a time 30 years ago when people wanted to take it down. It was never meant to be up. It was only supposed to be for the World's Fair. It cost $3 million to build in 62. And last year it cost $4 million to paint it.
I think that happens a lot with
Puts
the
things in
World Fair
perspective.
exhibits. The same is true for the Eiffel Tower. The Golden Gate Bridge, I think, was also built for one of the World's Fairs, but obviously that was meant to be more permanent. But tell us a little bit about your connection to Seattle. It's, you're almost synonymous with it. I think each of you has your own special connection, and I'd like to hear a little bit about. I think this exhibit is really a celebration of Seattle itself, and so maybe you can talk a little bit about your relationship with the city.
Well, I went to college in Tacoma for the first year. I didn't want to go to school. I was not a very good student. My mother talked me into going to school, and that winter I decorated her basement and thought I could be a great interior designer. So I transferred to the University of Washington in Seattle and got a degree in interior design and architecture. And it was during that time that I was beginning to work with glass and weaving in tapestries. And one night I melted some glass and blew a bubble. And from that point on, I wanted to be a glass blower. And I went to Alaska and I became a commercial fisherman to save money to go to graduate school, the University of Wisconsin. And I went to Venice, Italy after that. And I then went to the Rhode Island School of Design to start a glass department there. But at the same time, we started the Pilchuck Glass School. So every summer I would come back to Seattle, to Pilchuck, and every winter I would stay in Rhode Island. And I did that for 10 years. And when my sales of my glass matched my income as a professor, which was $18,000 a year in 1980, I quit teaching and came back to Seattle, and have been here ever since.
And Leslie, I know you've been working with numerous partners, most of whom are based here in Seattle. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your connection to the city.
Sure. Well, I moved here in '85 and went to graduate school at the UW in Russian Studies. And at that time, you couldn't find a restaurant that was open past 9. We didn't have, I mentioned a lot of the halls and the things that have happened really that have been built since I moved here. And I think what I saw was a city with a future. In fact, I didn't even think it really was a city. I thought it was a town, and I think it's become a city in this period of time. And so it was a really exuberant and hopeful place in terms of being able to build and do new things. We're not burdened with a lot of the traditions and history of older cities, and so it's a city where everything is possible. And so what's exciting to me about this project in the context of Seattle is not only the aesthetics and the fact that we're celebrating a local artist, as it were, but that we're going to be a convening place for all of the arts and for certainly the community partners, and we hope that list will grow over time. And I'm working with Michelle, and many of us are working hard to think about how the space will be used over time to really bring more attention to the incredible arts that we enjoy in the city.
And Michelle, you're now the executive director of this exhibit that really celebrates the city itself, some of its wonderful landmarks like the Space Needle. Tell us a little bit about your experience here in Seattle.
Well, just to build on what Leslie said about building our partnerships with this city, and we're also building partnerships on the campus, on the Seattle Center campus, and it's really exciting right now because of the 50th. There's so much going on. King Tut is opening in a month as well. We have the symphony, the ballet. It's really becoming a focal point, the whole campus, and this project is spearheading a program called Center Nights, where people everyone who's on campus will develop programming, and we'll open up our doors to great programming at least once a quarter for people to come. So I see it as really an opportunity to build excitement and to bring people to one center place for the arts. So that's been an exciting part of it. Personally, I've been involved with Dale's work since I worked at the Tacoma Art Museum and then opened the Museum of Glass. So I've been a big fan of glass, and most recently came from Pratt Fine Arts Center, which is one of the community partners for this project. So.
One of the interesting things at the museum is there's a cafe, and it's called Collections Cafe. And I think that one of the things that really surprised me when I got to visit the boathouse was all the different collections that you have, Dale. Everything from shaving brushes to accordions to Navajo blankets to something I didn't even realize existed, but there were string dispensers, which looked like little faces on the wall with pieces of string coming out of their mouths, because before there were tape dispensers, there were string dispensers. And I know that collecting and just collecting lots of different objects and looking at all the differences is a big part of your process as an artist. So tell us about some of the collections that you're more proud of. Maybe you wanted to give us a little bit of background of the cafe and what people can see there.
Well, I started when I was a kid, and I think a lot of kids collect things, marbles or toy soldiers or beach glass. But I just kept collecting. Usually you stop at a certain age. And I've always collected. Like, I have 500 accordions and 800 Pendleton blankets, 400 Northwest Coast Indian baskets. And I was down at the Pacific Galleries this weekend looking around. I ended up buying 4 original posters of the World's Fair from 1962. And Leslie asks me sometimes, what makes you collect? I don't know, I can't explain what it is exactly that makes me. Some people like to collect, and other people it's a bother. And the collection cafe was, we were going to have a cafe in the project no matter what, and it was just a perfect opportunity to get rid of some of those collections.
So I was there this morning, and you'll be able to see 28 of Dale's collections up close, including actually inside the tables. So each table will have its own collection of some of the things that Dale has collected over the years, from everything from miniature dogs to bottle openers. There's antique radios. There's a lot of really interesting artifacts that come with the cafe part of the museum.
Yeah, that's been a lot of fun. We did a little, I'll tell you what, we'll give everybody a little booklet. Only you don't get them today, but I did a little catalog about the cafe showing each collection, and I printed 20,000 of them to be given away at the cafe. And Leslie just told me today.
They're in.
Today
Big
they came
boxes
in.
full. All right.
They cost 51 cents each to print.
I've heard they've been a hot commodity. There's been 2 proof books to date that people keep wanting to take with them. So it'll be interesting to see the final product. Your work really happens in series. And you have some series for which you're very well known. The Macchia, the Venetians, the Seaforms. Do you have one series that you really love revisiting, or that one that you like the best?
Oh, I've been asked that question before, and I don't really have a good answer. It changes, Right now, I've been thinking about a series that I started a few years ago called the Jerusalem Cylinders. And in the next couple of weeks, we're going to start working on those again. So I'm thinking about Jerusalem Cylinders. Right now, they're kind of a favorite. But, sometimes it's the baskets, sometimes it's the Seaforms. It really does change. Because I thought about all of them before I ever developed them into a series. I didn't just say, okay, I'm going to make baskets and then work for 2 years on baskets. I waited until I really felt that I had something concrete before I pursued it. So it's hard to say. I wish I could answer that better for you.
And in the exhibit hall, there's 8 rooms, and each of them map to one of the series, and they have different themes. One of the interesting pieces about the exhibit is that it's in one of Seattle's highest traffic areas.
Thank you.
Like, lots of people go to the Space Needle. You've been really putting the Garden and Glass together with the public watching. Have there been particular pieces and exhibits that have been really hard to install? Are there any good stories of assembly so far?
I don't know if we're allowed to say those. sure. No, I think
I'll tell you.
you're looking at
Yeah.
one of the most challenging right there.
That armature for the glass house was probably one of the most, high-level engineering feats of
That
all
makes me
time.
think of that story I told you this at lunchtime about difficult situations. And that we blew glass in a little village in France, Vian. And I had the whole team over there. We had about 30 people working hand in hand with the French glass blowers. And we made enough glass to fill 2 containers, which we sent back to Seattle. Only one of the containers arrived. The other went over the side of the ship. And comes to find out that if you want to ship a container, if you want your container to be below deck, you have to pay an extra tariff. And somewhere that container's got a lot of bubble wrap in it, so I bet it's close to the surface somewhere.
We talked about the fact those containers often float, so that's the hazard of doing work abroad. But that said, I do think your time at University of Wisconsin and Venice, more specifically abroad, have really influenced your work. Can you give us a little bit of insight into how each of those locations has shaped your work and your vision today?
Well, let's see, at the University of Wisconsin, I was coming with a degree in interior design and architecture. I really hadn't made any art to say. And so when I got there, I was going to be in a graduate fine arts program. And I was really lucky to meet a couple of guys that were far more talented than I was. And I ended up, one of them was a roommate. And during that year, I really learned a great deal about art, not from my faculty, but from these guys I was living with. And that sort of set me off in the right direction. And when I went to what did you ask, the Rhode Island School of Design?
That or Venice, either one, both. Yeah.
Well, either one. I'll take Venice. Venice, I arrived in Venice. I had a Fulbright, which pays, I think it paid $450 a month at that time. And I arrived in Venice feeling a little depressed from graduating. And I finally made my way out to the Venini Glassworks, one of the most famous glassworks. And I had a letter from them saying that I could kind of observe there for 3 weeks. And I met the owner, and he had just gotten a possibility of doing a commission, a large commission, in a town square of Ferrara. And they didn't have any experience or anybody there that could really design something like that. And I talked him into letting me design it. And I used glass, I used plastic, I used neon. And so I got set up, I was given my own studio up on top of the factory. And there, I could have blown glass there if I wanted to, but they were so much better than I was. It was too embarrassing. But I got to watch all the time. And that's really one of the best ways to learn about glass blowing and a lot of other skills and crafts is by watching. And I learned, because back in the States, everybody had been working by themselves. And glass blowing doesn't work very well by yourself. It really takes a team of 2 or 3. We worked with a minimum of about 8 people on the team at any one time, and up as many as 15 people on a team working on the same piece of glass. So what I learned, more than anything, what I learned from Venice was teamwork.
And in addition, you're best known for glass blowing, but you also paint and draw. And one of my favorite things about Dale, I don't know if you guys can see his shoes, but he always has paint smattered shoes. So tell us a little bit about how drawing and painting influences your inspirations as an artist, and how is that part of your process?
Well, I never really drew that much. Even though in undergraduate, I had to make drawings of interiors and architecture. After that, I never drew that much, but I lost the sight of my eye in 1976, which meant I had no peripheral vision and no depth perception. And that made it difficult to work out there with a team. for obvious reasons. And so from that point on, I started having one of the really great glassblowers on the team, a young man named William Morris. I had Billy kind of head up the team, and I would make drawings to show him what I wanted to make. And so that was back in the late 70s. And I've been drawing and painting ever since. A lot of times it won't be, necessarily about what I'm going to make. It'll just be, I just like to paint.
I think one of the things that really, in addition to the scale of your work, that really sets your work apart is the thinness of the glass, how thin you're able to blow it, as well as the vibrancy of the color. And I imagine that some of those things are advances that you've developed with your team. Are there other technological advances that have come along in the past 40 years that have really changed glass blowing?
Probably the thin glass working that way was definitely innovative, but that allowed us to, when it was thin like that, we could heat it up in the furnace and it would begin to collapse or go asymmetrical. Glass, if you let it go on its own, it wants to be symmetrical. So if you're going to make it like these pieces here are perfectly round and without having that scalloped edge until the last reheat. And then it's heated up and it's spun open. They're about 2 feet in diameter, a little more. It's spun open and then it's spun harder, and the tips, because it had been blown in what we call an optical mold, which is a ribbed mold. We blew it in there at a certain point, which made the glass go thick and thin all the way around, and the thick parts remain hotter, and so they come out, and you get that scalloped effect. And so I suppose what I'm best known for is asymmetrical glass, using heat, fire, centrifugal force, gravity. Those are the tools. We use very few hand tools.
And I think, with that question, that answer is about innovation. And so one of the questions I'd like to ask all three of you is are there things that you've learned along the way through the partnerships, through developing the exhibit, and also through your work through the many schools, Pilchuck, Rhode Island School of Design? Are there lessons that you think could apply to tech and to other industries, things you've learned along the way that you think are true about pushing a science or a medium forward?
Well, probably teamwork.
I'm just thinking about the new model that this Chihuly Garden and Glass represents, because it's really privately owned and operated by the Wright family, and it's called Wright Art LLC. And so this is the first time that something like this has been done in a city, and yet we're partnering with nonprofit groups. We're not a nonprofit. We're not building a nonprofit board. We're not fundraising. So the fact that it's been a private investment by a leading family in the community is new, and the fact that it's being done in some ways to feel like a museum, to feel like a nonprofit in the kinds of programs and commitment that we have to community. So I think it's really a very innovative approach to the organization.
That's great.
I suppose the most important of all is being creative, which would be obviously critical to what you guys do, and obviously critical to what I do, and just being as innovative as you possibly can. Get up early and have a lot of ideas.
So as I've been reading, though, about Dale's work and preparing, one thing is the way that you brought it up earlier, Marissa, about how you continue to go back to a series and push it a little bit further, and the end result of that ends up being something completely different maybe than you started with 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And I think that is one thing that we could all learn in our different disciplines that we work in, and is that pushing it but also coming back to it, revisiting the idea again in a different light.
I wonder if I touched on this a minute ago, but if I'm starting off a new series let's just say it happens to be these Persians, and I'll work and I'll experiment and we'll make them over and over, try different things. Then at a certain point, I'd have a month or two worth of work, and all through that process, I'm trying to decide whether or not this work should become a series for me, whether or not it's worth investing the time and energy in. On the other hand, if I keep investing time and energy into something that's going to be a loser, that's a big mistake. And I have to decide, at what point I cut it loose, or at what point I decide that I'm going to exhibit it. Once I exhibit it, it sort of gets locked in. And I would imagine that the same thing applies to what you do to a certain degree.
There's a lot of prototyping and iteration in what we do, and then also figuring out when are we going to take something and really scale it.
Yeah.
It's the equivalent of it, probably the technological equivalent of having a series. And when are we going to just let an experiment go? So I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll go to the audience for a few audience questions, if you guys have some. And my question is about, I think that this piece that we're seeing here on the screen, which is the glass house and the new garden and glass house, is really innovative, and it really is pushing the bounds, and it is the centerpiece. It's 100 feet long, 40 feet tall, 1,400 pieces of glass. What was the inspiration here? You said you had always wanted to do it, but what was it inspired by?
Well, I always wanted to do a glass house, which kind of makes me think of a chapel or a cathedral, and I just kind of designed the glass house along with what was going to be inside. And again, it was primarily to make something that people hadn't seen before, with the most gorgeous color that I could do, with the right amount of work in the glass house so that I didn't get overpowered, because I love the structure as well.
We have our own, well, you can talk about this, the armature itself, the structure of that is built in our studio. And I think over all of the years of the projects that Dale's worked on, that particular aspect has gotten more and more sophisticated. The engineering that goes into having something that's 100 feet long overhead, suspended from glass, is something that's really not been done. So,
I think one of the things that Googlers can really relate to is, in your work, there's a ton of engineering. There's a lot of math, there's a lot of geometry, there's a lot of thinking through what will work. And so with that, I'd like to invite some of the Googlers to ask questions. Do we have any questions from the audience?
One thing is that, you're probably familiar with this, but if the chandelier weighs, say, 1,000 pounds, this one probably weighs 25,000 pounds. But if it weighed 1,000 pounds, we're going to put it in Google someplace. The engineers want to rate it to hold 5,000 pounds. So it's a 5-to-1 ratio, which can be a problem, because somebody wants a chandelier in their house and it won't support what's required from engineering. It would support it, but not the way the engineers want to support it.
And I remember in some of your Persian ceilings, I remember reading that, which I was surprised by, that glass actually has flex. So for these long expanses of glass that other pieces of glass sit on, you actually, if you need a 5-foot piece, you actually need 5 foot and like a half an inch, because it actually will bow, which I didn't realize that glass actually had that much play and flexibility in it. So do we have a question?
Yeah, so this is a beautiful exhibit. I have to know what's next. What other exhibits you have in the pipeline?
Leslie, tell them what we're doing.
We've got a show. Before we open this Chihuly Garden and Glass, we've got a show at the Dallas Arboretum coming up first week of May. It'll be up through the summer, just during tornado season. So we'll see how we fare on that. And then in the fall, we've got Virginia Museum of Fine Arts coming up. Another less than a year after that is the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. And we're looking at some interesting projects in Shanghai and in Beijing in terms of museum shows and interesting sort of exhibition opportunities.
Yeah, Dallas will be I think it's the 12th Arboretum or Conservatory show that I've done starting about 10 years ago. And that was a great deal to do because of my interest in glass houses and greenhouses.
You've talked a lot about mentorship and teamwork, both the way you were mentored early on by getting to watch some of your fellow students and peers work. There's a really burgeoning art scene here in Seattle. How do you envision Chihuly Garden and Glass and your studio interacting with that group of artists?
Well, one factoid that we mentioned in the past, and I don't know if you're aware of it, is that we actually have more people working in glass in the Seattle area than in anywhere else in the world, including Murano. So this is and we've also got an MFA and a BA program in glass now at the UW. We've got the Pilchuck Glass School, which I mentioned earlier. So there's a constant sort of evolution of the educational aspects that are possible for people in this area at all ages. We've got an at-risk glass blowing program that's integrated into the Tacoma Public Schools called the Hilltop program. So really at all ages, we're thinking about glass and education around glass as an opportunity, sort of as a lift-off point for creative thinking, for working with your hands, for thinking about ideas conceptually. And who knows, you think about the great history of glass, and what used to happen in Venice is that if you escaped the island of Venice and you made it to England with the secrets, you were knighted, but if you were caught leaving Venice, you were beheaded. So Dale, one of his great innovations and really generous gifts to the art community is that he really opened up the community, he opened up the secrets, he invited the great glass masters of Venice to come and work here. And so now there's this sort of passing of the torch that goes back and forth between the people who've worked in glass for a long time and those who are coming into it now.
We have a few questions here at the microphone.
So something in the lines along education. So you mentioned that you started out with glass blowing pretty little. How little were you, and how little will be a kid to be old enough to do glass blowing? And do you have any advice for kids that are too little? What can they do at home or to start having the creativity exploring them?
Well, our son started blowing glass when he was about 8. Unfortunately, quit when he was about 10. But there are a couple of other kids that blow glass at around 8 or 9 years old. You can get quite good, actually. Something they can do at a younger age is to, and it's what I did when I was in college, getting my degree, and I started putting those bits of glass in tapestries. I needed to make it so that the glass wasn't sharp. So I got a little oven about 2 feet across that would go up to, it was a ceramic oven. It went up to about 2,500 degrees. And so I would put them in the oven and take it up high enough to round the edges. And then I started putting one piece attached to another, which is called fusing. And then I started working with making little 3-dimensional sculptures. But you could have, I would imagine you could have, probably from about the age of 5, you could have kids start working with stained glass or glass fusing. Glass fusing would be easier actually than stained glass. You have to, you have to figure out at what point can they learn to cut the glass, but they could probably learn at a pretty young age. Was that your question? Okay.
And we'll take one more question.
So an exhibit like this probably takes a lot of planning for light. How did you do that how do you plan to have the lighting affect this exhibit when it's not sunny in Seattle?
I couldn't hear it. Did you hear it?
Okay, so it's talking about light and how did we plan it with the effect of light and.
Yeah, I mean, you need a lot of light for something like this with glass, right? And
I can tell you this, at different times of the day, you have a completely different experience in the glass house and the way that the light of the day reflects on the glass that's in there. What's so amazing about it is that it actually changes as there's sun or no light. It's just amazing to look at the different qualities of the glass. And I think that's one of the reasons people will continue to keep coming back, is just to see that that difference. But as far as the planning goes, that was all Dale's vision. So.
You know, there are really only 3 or 4 materials that transmit light of any scale. There are a few gems like, you know, diamonds and things, but of materials of any scale, there's only glass, plastic. Actually, this is a good audience. See if I'm wrong. You got glass, plastic, ice, and water. Those are, well, alabaster would be one maybe. Those are about the only material that light can go through. And that's what makes glass so incredibly mysterious. If you have a little bit of, if I put a piece of red glass on the wall down there, 100 feet down the other end, 1 inch square, and I lit it from behind with the sun or with a par 36 light bulb, you would easily see that 1 inch square. Any other material, you couldn't even see it. There's something very magical about glass. Now, anybody think of another material? See, it's tough.
Well, and actually going through the exhibit today, I think that, you know, it actually merits a few visits. Like, I started noticing that, you know, at first you notice all the color and the shapes and the forms, and then you start to realize how many different lights there are here and there, the actual engineering behind the exhibit and the armatures and things like that. And so I definitely encourage all of you to go to Chihuly Garden and Glass when it opens on May 23rd, May 21st. So definitely encourage you to go visit and make multiple visits. There's a lot there to see. It's a culmination of bringing together of an amazing career and a career that's still in progress. I'm sure we're going to see even more great things from in the future. And it's been a huge honor to have all of you here today to talk about the project and talk about your career and your accomplishments.
It's our honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.